welcome to this deep dive. You've brought us some really compelling material today, exploring that classic human tension, yearning for approval versus, well, pursuing something deeper.
That's right.
And today we're digging into Richard Baxter's work, The Sin of Man-Pleasing. Now, I know what some might think sounds maybe a bit old-fashioned.
Right.
But the sources you shared, they really unpack why constantly chasing human approval can, well, seriously hold us back. It's surprisingly relevant.
It really is. And look, our goal isn't to say, go live in a cave.
Oh, no, definitely not.
It's about dissecting Baxter's core ideas.
Yeah.
To understand the real risks. When we put what others think above everything else, it's like recalibrating our internal compass.
Making sure we're not valuing shifting opinions over something more solid.
Exactly. Something lasting.
Okay, so let's get into this idea of sin, because it's not just about being, a nice, agreeable person, is it?
No, not at all. That's a key point. The real heart of man-pleasing, as Baxter sees it, is about where your ultimate loyalty lies. It's not about simple kindness or respect. It's more fundamental. It's when that desire for human approval starts to overshadow your concern for God's approval.
When you fear what people think more than what God thinks.
Precisely. And Baxter frames that as a kind of idolatry. You're basically putting human opinion up on a pedestal.
Where God should be.
That's his argument.
And he really grounds this in Scripture, doesn't he? I mean, looking through the material, the references are just everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. He doesn't just state this, he anchors it firmly. He draws on, well, a lot of passages that warn against giving human opinion too much weight.
Like which ones? Just the big picture.
Sure. He points to places like Isaiah 2, warning against trusting mortals. Matthew 23, where Jesus cautions about seeking titles from others. Jeremiah 20, on relying on human strength.
Okay.
Psalm 118 talks about finding strength in God, not people. Job chapters 32 and 21 questions flattering people. Galatians 1 contrasts pleasing people versus serving Christ.
Yep.
Then you've got 1 Corinthians 4 on the limits of human judgment. Luke 14 on radical commitment. Matthew 5 about blessings for facing criticism for doing right. Ephesians 6 and Colossians 3 warn against just doing things for show. 1 Thessalonians 2 contrasts pleasing people versus God. And Jude 16 criticizes flatterers.
Wow. Okay. So taken together, that's a pretty strong biblical case against excessive people-pleasing.
It paints a powerful picture, yeah. It's about the danger of that focus.
Got it. So it boils down to the ultimate why behind our actions. But Baxter does make it clear we're not supposed to just be jerks.
No, definitely not.
There are times when trying to please others is actually good, necessary.
Yes, absolutely. And this distinction is really important to him. He's careful to outline situations where pleasing others isn't just okay, it's actually a duty.
Like what?
Well, first off, honoring and obeying parents, rulers, legitimate authorities. He sees their authority as God-given, citing texts like Romans 13, Exodus 20, Titus 3, 1 Peter 2, 2 Peter 2.
Standard stuff, but important.
Right. Then there's the whole area of charity and consideration. Being willing to accommodate others, especially for their spiritual good, maybe setting aside your own preferences in minor things if it helps someone else's faith.
So thinking about how our actions affect others, prioritizing love.
Exactly. Thirdly, he says we should try to be agreeable with neighbors, foster good relationships, as long as it's through lawful means. We are commanded to love our neighbors, after all.
Okay. What else?
Fourth, deferring to the judgment of those who genuinely know more, not being arrogant. Fifth, respecting the guidance, even correction from faithful teachers, assuming it aligns with Scripture. Even if you disagree, respond respectfully.
Humility, basically, and respecting proper roles.
That's a big part of it. Sixth, he suggests that if, thoughtful, godly people raise concerns about your behavior, you should take it seriously. Do some self-reflection. Conversely, their encouragement can be helpful, though not definitive proof you're okay. Seventh, he acknowledges a good reputation is valuable, a gift from God even that can help you serve him better. Sometimes you need to defend it.
Right, especially for leaders.
And finally, interestingly, he says, don't totally dismiss criticism even from difficult people or enemies. Sometimes there might be a kernel of truth you can learn from.
Okay, so it's definitely nuanced. Not people-pleasing, but not needless antagonism either.
Precisely.
Now, Baxter spends a lot of time explaining why relying too much on human approval is such a flawed strategy.
He does, yeah, and his reasons are pretty compelling. He really emphasizes how weak and unreliable human judgment actually is.
How so?
Well, people make mistakes. We misunderstand things, we're biased, we often act out of self-interest, so basing your self-worth or your life's direction on that, it's like building your house on shifting sand.
Yeah, it's never stable. What one person loves, the next person hates. Yeah.
Exactly. And he also stresses, look, if you're genuinely trying to live righteously, you will face criticism, maybe even slander.
Like Christ himself did.
Just like Christ and his followers did, yes. He argues the world often resists true holiness. So trying to please everyone, it's just impossible.
Why impossible?
Because opinions clash. People have selfish expectations. There's ignorance, factionalism, just a general opposition to godliness, like Peter talks about in 1 Peter 4.
He uses some pretty striking examples for this, doesn't he?
He does, really memorable ones. There's the analogy of a beggar with only so much money try to please every needy person, and you'll inevitably disappoint most.
Yeah, stretch it that far.
Right, and he talks about ministers trying to satisfy all the contradictory demands in a congregation. That sounds exhausting.
Oh, I bet.
He points to Matthew 11, how people criticized John the Baptist for being too strict, but then they turned around and criticized Jesus for being too sociable.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Pretty much. Baxter also makes the point that even outstanding virtue is no shield against slander. Look at the accusations against Jesus.
True.
He even warns that after you die, people might twist your legacy to fit their own agendas. Historical revisionism.
Oof, that's sobering.
And crucially, he emphasizes that even people like Jesus and the Apostle Paul couldn't please everyone. He cites Acts 20 and chunks of Corinthians, like 1 Corinthians 4 and 9, then large parts of 2 Corinthians chapters 4 through 6 and 10 through 12, plus Galatians 4.
So if they couldn't manage universal approval.
What hope do we have, right? He specifically mentions 2 Corinthians 12, where Paul sadly notes that the more he loved some of the Corinthians, the less they seemed to love him back.
Wow, that really puts our own craving for validation in perspective. Which leads naturally to his next big point, right? The superiority of God's judgment.
Exactly. He draws a sharp contrast. Fleeting, flawed human opinion versus the eternal, perfect judgment of God.
Because God sees everything accurately.
And he's the ultimate judge. He has the power to save and destroy, as James 4 says. And John mentions in Revelation 1, God is the one who justifies, who declares us righteous. That's Paul in Romans 8.
And God's verdict lasts.
And it will often overturn human verdicts. Baxter points to Isaiah 5 and Proverbs 24, which talk about future reversals of how things are valued on earth.
So, focusing on pleasing God gives you a stable foundation, unlike the shifting sands of human opinion.
That's the core idea. God's standards don't change. His judgment is perfect. It's reliable.
Okay. Now, he also talks about the negative side effects of being a man-pleaser, calls it almost a kind of slavery.
Yes, he does. He argues that constantly chasing approval makes you a slave to others' opinions. You're always trying to guess what they want, meet their expectations. Paul warns about this in 1 Corinthians 7, and James 4 touches on it too.
That sounds absolutely exhausting, just draining.
It is. And what's the reward for all that effort? Baxter calls it a pitiful reward, echoing Jesus in Matthew 6 talking about hypocrites seeking praise.
Fleeting praise versus eternal reward.
Exactly. That human praise is a poor substitute for what God offers. Baxter contends that real, true honor often comes when you actually stop caring so much about worldly acclaim and focus on a higher purpose.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we break free from needing everyone's approval all the time? Does Baxter give practical steps?
He does offer some directions, yeah. First, he says, really understand what this sin is, so you don't swing too far the other way and become needlessly offensive.
Find the balance.
Right. Then, consciously recognize human favor for what it often is, a potential snare, a trap. Remind yourself constantly of man's limitations and the supreme importance of God's judgment.
Keep perspective.
Yes, and acknowledge the deep unquietness, the anxiety that comes from a life built around pleasing others. It's not a peaceful way to live.
For sure.
Ultimately, his main direction is simple. Make pleasing God the main business of your life, your primary focus.
Shift your gaze. Makes sense.
What?
Focus on the one whose opinion actually matters eternally.
And Baxter says there are real upsides to this, real benefits. Oh, absolutely. He lists several advantages of putting God first. For one, you're trying to please one perfect being instead of countless flawed and often contradictory people.
Simpler for a start.
Definitely. And that one is perfectly wise, good, impartial, consistent. His requirements, Baxter says, are merciful, not arbitrary. Pleasing him leads to genuine, lasting happiness.
What else?
Things like inner peace, divine guidance, a kind of ennoblement, a transformation of your character. He references passages like Jeremiah 9 and Isaiah 8 here.
So internal benefits primarily.
Mostly, but interestingly, he also suggests that pleasing God can actually lead to better, more authentic relationships with people, too. It echoes that idea in Proverbs 16, when your ways please the Lord, he makes even your enemies be at peace with you.
That's fascinating. Almost paradoxical, isn't it? Stop trying so hard to win people over, and you might actually build better connections.
It seems that way, because your motives become purer, less about manipulation or fear, more about genuine love rooted in honoring God. Your interactions become more authentic.
Okay. And finally, did Baxter give any, like, signs or indicators? Ways to tell if we're actually living to please God, not just people.
He did provide some markers, yes. Things to look for in yourself.
Such as?
Well, a consistent effort to diligently study Scripture, to really understand God's will, that's fundamental.
Okay. Knowing the standard.
Right. Then, consciously prioritizing God's pleasure over human approval in your daily choices and duties, looking beyond just what you do to why you do it, examining your inner motives.
Heart matters.
Immensely. Also, valuing your private spiritual life, prayer, reflection just as much, if not more, than your public religious activities.
Not just for show.
Exactly. Reverencing your conscience as God's voice within you. Ensuring that when you do try to please others, it springs from genuine charity and godly motives, not fear or self-interest.
Right. Connecting back to those legitimate reasons we discussed earlier.
Yes. And ultimately, habitually valuing God's judgment far above any human opinion, positive or negative. That's the bottom line.
So it's really a deep internal reorientation, a fundamental shift in what we value most.
That's it, exactly. It's about consciously aligning our lives with an eternal perspective, not just the approval ratings of the moment.
Wow. This has been incredibly insightful, really digging into Baxter's thinking here. The core takeaway feels like, yes, relationships matter, kindness matters, but the ultimate aim, the driving force, should be pleasing God.
That really is the crux of it, getting our affections and priorities in the right order.
So for everyone listening, as you process all this, maybe the question to chew on is this: how might intentionally shifting your focus away from seeking that external validation towards seeking God's approval, how might that actually reshape your perspective, your actions, in specific parts of your life, like work, family, personal goals?
That's a powerful question to sit with.
It really makes you think.
Definitely. Baxter's wisdom, though centuries old, really offers a solid starting point for reflecting on what gives life true meaning and stability. This deep dive is hopefully just the beginning of that exploration for our listeners.